every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
You can't handle the truth!
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Bennett and Michael J. on Shell Games. We're coming to you on August 8th, 2018. And we're going to be having a guest with us from the Lyndon Institute to begin addressing some of these issues that we're going to be discussing in the international realm, Russia, China, Iran. And we're also going to be addressing, I think, a very important development, such as the WikiLeaks Julian Assange invitation by the United States Senate to come and testify. That just came out today. The Senate Intelligence Committee has invited Julian Assange to testify, and it's being discussed. John Kiriakou, the CIA whistleblower, has been talking about this as it's interesting because it has a lot of potential, but it has to have an immunity clause attached to it, and the Senate has to give immunity to Julian Assange. That way he cannot be arrested or prosecuted with anything that he discloses at this testimony. Now, it may be behind closed doors. There's talk that it's going to be given to staffers, not senators necessarily, but we'll follow this as it comes along. But this is a crucial development because WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and all of the WikiLeaks cables from 2012, actually before that, from 2007 and 8 and 9, really 8 and 9, capture an enormous body of evidence that could be used to prosecute Hillary Clinton. And I saw those personally, and I included those in my whistleblowing report, Shell Game. These were State Department cables that WikiLeaks had provided to Brad Birkenfeld, the Swiss banker who was arrested and prosecuted by Hillary Clinton and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Covington and Burling, and this whole cabal of criminals involved with capturing terrorist financing money and accounts and using them for nefarious black operations. So all of that can be discussed, as well as everything regarding Peter Strzok and Seth Rich and the DNC hack and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and everything that the American public needs to know that will confirm this coup d'etat that was attempted against President Trump. Julian Assange could provide the witness testimony about. So this is very exciting. We're going to get into that, and then we'll have our guest. Michael J., I'm going to let you open us up in prayer. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Scott. Heavenly Father, thank you for what you're doing in your creation throughout your world. Thank you, Father, that you have been raising up people that bring the unfruitful works of darkness out into the light. Lord, we're so grateful that you use people like Julian Assange to show what the deep state was doing in their murderous missions, in their false flag war, Lord, in the Middle East. And we're grateful, Lord, that you have been keeping him safe. We're thankful, Father, that you've given many Americans a new hope, a sense of encouragement because of what you have been doing, using President Trump to negotiate this horrendous swamp of corruption and profound evil. Lord, we ask, Father, that you continue to lead this nation out of this season of darkness. We're praying for your protection concerning deep state murderers and traitors. We're asking, Father, that you help us as we're inviting you into the narrative, as we're acknowledging you in this, because, Lord, you're calling us out of confusion, out of unbelief, out of religious hypocrisy into a place where we're taking responsibility for acknowledging that this nation has drifted far from you, does not manifest the fear of God that it used to, and we need, Lord, you to help us. We need to be called as a nation to prayer and to repentance. We're asking your help in these things through Christ our Savior, because you raised him from the dead and gave us hope, and we commit ourselves into your hands. Amen. Scott, I was thinking about the amazing parallel that we're seeing in different whistleblowers that have been imprisoned, as Julian Assange has essentially been under house arrest for years now, and yet I can remember that we have noticed the significance of what he did, because essentially he gave President Trump everything he needed to become President Trump. And we've voiced an opinion that Julian Assange really deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. What do you think?
Well, he does, of course. Julian Assange, I think, is one of the greatest. He deserves the Nobel Prize for Literature, I would say, because he has provided a platform for the greatest, revelations of truth. Yes, he does absolutely first and foremost deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for peace, because it has to be understood psychologically that violence and war comes from either reactions to attack and reactions to abuses and violence against you, or a bloodlust for the resources, the materials of another country, the conquest of another country, or it is the reaction of revenge that has been created by lies. 9/11 is a great example of that. The lies of 9/11, the lies that we were attacked, the lies of this this fantasy narrative that Muslims jumped on board a plane and invaded the greatest military satellite apparatus in the history of civilization, suddenly was able to crash in, attack the buildings of the New York and the Pentagon. All of that was a lie, but it triggered an emotional response in America that led them to this war for 18 years. So WikiLeaks has exposed a lot of that. I don't think it's exposed to the full extent it should, the 9/11 lies. That's something that's interestingly missing, that needs to be mined. I mean, one thing I would do is assign a special team of researchers to go through all of the cables, all of the documents, everything. They may not be able to because it wasn't around in 2001, the internet and all of that. But NSA certainly has them. NSA could do a triangulation of every phone call, every email that ever went out between Dick Cheney and Benjamin Netanyahu and anyone else in the United States, and most likely in foreign countries. You could piece together the electronic chatter, the trail of conversation, the trail of communication, the phone calls. You could, if you had the resources and the willpower, assemble a fantastic schematic and slowly begin to form the body of evidence that proves all of this collusion and planning, and they haven't done that. They've had 18 years, I think, and they certainly should. But WikiLeaks, let me cut to the chase. WikiLeaks can provide that. It has provided a lot. I know personally because when I was thrown in prison by the Obama administration, I saw WikiLeaks cables. I collected WikiLeaks cables that were given to me by whistleblowers and their lawyers, and it was profound because the cables that I saw occurred at the same time that I worked at the State Department, and the cables were indicating that Hillary Clinton and the State Department and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer were devising a conspiracy to send Chinese Uyghur terrorists out of Guantanamo Bay into Switzerland instead of sending them to China. Now, remember, these are terrorists. These are bad guys. These are crazy lunatics that want to turn the world into ISIS. That's at least the narrative we're told. But wouldn't you think the United States would have taken these Chinese Uyghurs and given them to China to prosecute, to imprison, or to set free? They're Chinese Uyghurs. And instead, the United States under Hillary Clinton, who is the State Department person, and the Pentagon. Never forget, Guantanamo Bay was a Pentagon military establishment. And the Pentagon conspired, collaborated with Hillary Clinton to take terrorists that China is in fear of and send them to Switzerland so they could get new identities, so that they could access Swiss bank accounts, like the Bourne identity scene. They could access Swiss bank accounts and then use those for terrorist operations that they would be using against China, against other areas. That's what happened. That's what the WikiLeaks cables prove. That's what Brad Birkenfeld's testimony proved behind closed doors, and they never released it. There's a lot of material that he provided, and they violated Brad's immunity by throwing him in prison using the very words that he testified to Congress to help American citizens. And he was an American citizen. So what they did to Brad Birkenfeld, they could try to do to Julian Assange. That's why it's very important to get the immunity very open and transparent, to have it ironclad and airtight. and allow Julian Assange to physically come to Washington, D.C., under the complete protection of the Senate Intelligence Committee to provide this testimony. And the president should also, I know he needs to be delicate, he needs to be gentle, because he cannot appear to be conspiring or working with Julian Assange, because that'll allow the Democrats to completely try and tar and feather him, and the neocons to do the same. He has to kind of distance himself. But it should be very clear that Trump should assign a special agent to the Department of Justice to guarantee that Julian Assange is allowed to come over, testify before the Senate, and at that same time he should be allowed to come over and be deposed by the United States government, the Justice Department, to challenge anything that they may be contemplating indicting him for. And other things, and at least starting that conversation. So in one sense, this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back on the deep state, because nothing is more powerful than someone standing up and testifying boldly, fearlessly, telling the truth with passion, telling their story, and doing it with aggressive, heartfelt, personal experience. And that's what that's what Manafort needs to do. And incidentally, I think the Manafort case is fascinating, because this whole thing could be thrown out. From what I've been gathering, the judge seems to be increasingly similar to the judge that conducted the investigation of the Bundys and all of that. And throughout the case, the same thing could happen to Manafort. The judge can move after the prosecution gives its case. And it says the prosecution rests. The defense can file a motion with the court and say, Your Honor, based on the evidence and the testimony, we're asking the court to dismiss this case because it does not rise to the level of prosecution. And furthermore, there are violations, fraud on the court, all sorts of things that are coming to light now that the prosecution has relied upon to fabricate this indictment. And we're asking the court to dismiss everything with prejudice and hold the prosecution in contempt and do an investigation into the prosecution for its activities and its materials. The judge can do that, and it could go the way of what they did to Ted Stevens. Remember, they tried to prosecute Ted Stevens. The lawyers and the prosecution lied, and the judge threw out the case and held the prosecutors in a contempt and began an investigation into them. And one of the lawyers hung himself, killed himself, because he knew that they had lied and cheated. So this whole thing could go that way. And in that case, Trump is keeping his hands clean. He's keeping a distance. He's letting it unfold, the natural way. But the truth is on his side. He's got nothing to fear. And we haven't even brought in the tag team partners that we know, Mike, such as all of the stuff with Brad Birkenfeld, all of the stuff with Cohen, and the conversations we've had, and the recordings of those conversations, and the shell game report that was given. All of that is waiting like just a load of bricks to come crashing down on all of them. Go ahead.
I think the key word there is waiting, because we know they received your report in 2012. It went to Congress. It went up the military chain of command. And we know that there is evidence that there's always been a core. Maybe many of them were hidden because Obama did do a purge of people who would not sign on to a program that would demand that they might be required to fire on American citizens. Obama was the one that was used by the deep state to get the federal government to purchase more than 1 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition. Obama was the one, under his administration, we were seeing advertisements for people that were called internment camp specialists. Obama was the one that brought forward the Jade Helm 2015, where they were doing a practice and sending out feelers out there to see what the reaction would be in the American people. And because of the internet, Jade Helm 2015, which was about internment camps and firing on people in not only in urban areas but out in the boonies, and we saw a whole bunch of really strange things happening, like Walmarts were shutting down and got fences around them and had guards and everything like that. And now we're understanding now that the reaction that the American people had, and the fact that Obama was being used, even as subtle as he was being used to set the American people up for a great tragedy based on the globalist financial system and bringing America crashing down. Now, Julian Assange, I think this is about timing. This is about, we've been waiting. This is about the fact that there are reports that President Putin did give President Trump 160 terabytes of the kind of information you've been talking about with respect to, they know who blew up the World Trade Center. I don't doubt for a minute that Trump knows who blew up the World Trade Center. The cultural awareness is growing because of people like Robert David Steele and his memorandum to President Trump on 9/11 and his gathering with the help of Professor James Fetzer, all of these experts with different perspectives, including yourself, Scott, to be a part of this report of one-page memorandums sent to President Trump so he can have all the evidence that he needs. But here's the key. He's got evidence from President Putin. He's got evidence from the generals that and the admirals and whatever, like the admiral from NSA. What's his name, brother? Rogers? Are you there? Anyway,
Mike Rogers.
Yeah, Admiral Mike Rogers. He has evidence from people like General Flynn. I believe General Flynn has always been in the background, and I think personally that he's involved in the Q movement. But the reality is now he's also got the permission that is in the timing. Now I believe he used the Senate to bring this about. In other words, Trump didn't send an invitation to Julian Assange. He used the Senate Intelligence Committee to send this out because I believe what we're seeing is the timing is right. We've been waiting for this because Trump knew that Julian Assange helped him win the election. And Trump also knows that Russia knew that if Hillary Clinton and her deep state traitors, people that have been helping her since the 90s to destroy America with these NAFTA, GATT, and all these other things. Now is the time, that Russia knew we were going to war if Hillary won. Okay, the deep state was using her as the masthead on the death ship, okay, to drive this death ship, which was a broken America, into total destruction. That's what the deep state wanted, because America is still filled with millions of people that they called deplorable that were not going to go along with the New World Order. And so right now we're seeing, Scott, that the culmination of all of these things has brought us to a time where, we're seeing, against the background of multiple attempts against the president's life, we're seeing that the deep state is panicking. They're going into, demonic overdrive and in their shadow banning people and trying to control the narrative on Twitter and Facebook and whatever. But we just heard that in the past day or so, elections, or rather voting that has to do with primaries, gave Trump at least 5 wins. Everybody he endorsed won. And so what we're looking at is that there's been a sea change. There's been amazing grace manifesting in this culture, in this time. And Scott, I'm very encouraged, more encouraged than I've been in decades, really, that we're about to see a major, move of the American people in America, because Trump is giving the American people all the ammunition they need, and all of the understanding is kind of flowing into the culture right now in spite of the fake news and the mass media insanity. We're seeing Americans waking up across the board, Scott, and I think that this, one of the most amazing signs of this, is this invitation to Julian Assange.
Well, the thing is, we understand the facts. We're honest about it, and we're able to stand up and scare the hell out of these senators and congressmen, because sadly, many of them are liars and they're corrupt, and they represent everything that American citizens despise. That's one of the reasons that they hold Congress in such low contempt, is because of their disgusting lies. And you just, you turn on some of the news, and I can't even stomach the mainstream.
Don't forget
media
their
news.
cowardice, brother.
Yeah, they are cowards. I mean, I'll never forget walking into Pete's, and I see that little Irish kid from the Dublin office that's always on Tucker Carlson. What the heck's his name? Eric
Swalwell. He's kind of a maniac. He's a perverted maniac. I think he's got a good relationship with the sodomite Obongo, though. But he's kind of a maniac.
Yeah. Well, I mean, walking up to him and saying, "Hey, I've got something that you need, Congressman. It's about terrorist financing and blah 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 blah." And I won't go into the details. He looks at me and his eyes go wide. And he stutters and stammers and pulls out his card saying, okay, here. And I said, okay, thanks. Yeah, I know who you are. He says, Eric, as if we're buddies. Call me Eric. But I mean, the fear in his eyes, and I mean, they just can't handle it. And that's what's also very promising, is that we're entering a stage where I think real leaders are coming out. I mean, their reaction with cutting out Alex Jones and InfoWars and so many of these people, Daniel McAdams from the Ron Paul Institute, he's been on RT, he's been on Crosstalk, he's a smart guy. I don't agree with all of the things all of these people say all of the time, but the Twitter and the Facebook and all these platforms taking them down really is a sign of the Kristallnacht, when they, started the fire and blamed the Jews and all that other stuff, and it was started actually by the Nazis. They're doing the same thing here. So the Senate invitation to Julian Assange is powerful. I think it's going to open up doors. One of the things I'm very much looking forward to is, of course, going back to Marc Desaulniers' office and directly challenging about this and presenting this material again and videotaping it again and taking him to task. And because this is something that Julian Assange will confirm. And in the confirmation, it will be known that all of the shell game revelations were actually provided by WikiLeaks and Brad Birkenfeld, and it does indicate another layer of criminality by Hillary Clinton. It also indicates criminality of Dianne Feinstein and Bill Nelson of Florida, both of whom are running for Senate again, and they should be immediately disqualified for holding office based on this act of treason and cover-up, crimes against the Constitution. So I think it's exciting, but we'll have to wait and see. One of the things I did see today, and I sent out a Facebook message and others, I got a memo on the or a flyer on the mailbox. I looked at it, and it's from the police department, Danville Police Department, saying they're conducting a live shooter event tomorrow in Danville, California. So there's going to be a live shooter event, and it struck me that this is the same thing that they've done in Parkland. Before there was an actual shooter event, they had a drill. They had a drill of a shooter event. So it's very mysterious. And this is the first time that I know in the history of this area.
Why would they do it in Danville, brother?
Why? I don't know.
Do they have any troublemakers here in Danville shining a light? And do you think maybe they can use this as a kind of a cover for some black ops coming in here with, to take care of these troublemakers, under a live shooting event? It won't be the first time that they use an exercise in it and it goes live. Okay.
Yeah.
Active shooter. Well, that's amazing. I'm grateful that you let me know that.
Yeah. I'll show you the flyer. I just set it up on Facebook and put it out. So I think it requires some phone calls and investigations to see what is behind this. Who's behind this? Is there federal agencies involved? How much is this costing? And I'm, for one, going to go out with a camera and videotape it. It's occurring between like 8 and 1 p.m. tomorrow. And allegedly you're going to have police, fire trucks, ambulances. It's a typical, quote, shooter event at the problem school for kids, right? There's a school where kids go who drop out of high school.
Right.
So they're doing it at this school that is known for problem kids, as if a problem kid is shooting up the school. And,
is that right? Wow.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
Well, that's amazing. Maybe they can find somebody they can point out as looks like a skinhead. Maybe they can do that here in Danville, California. That's amazing. Well, Scott, we're seeing something where the sides are being divided. We're seeing people, that are crazy actually going more crazy. We're seeing people that were pursuing truth for decades now are now being confirmed like never before. We're seeing exposés of counterfeit Christianity in their 501c3 temples of religious worship, but not the evidence of true Christianity calling America to repentance. We don't see much of that coming out of those temples, but we do see other Christians standing up in the gap and saying, what God is calling us to say. We need to confess the sins of this nation. We need to acknowledge that we've murdered millions of children made in the image of God.
And look at Russia. Let's talk about that. Russia just have a moratorium on abortions.
Yes. I like to call it child sacrifice because for whatever reason people are doing, they resent the use of the term child sacrifice because that infers religion. But I want to say that if somebody has actually made their own life their religion, and they're sacrificing that child for the sake of convenience, it's a religious sacrifice because it's something that you're choosing to do over obeying God. And that's a form of blasphemy, rebellion, which is witchcraft, and murder. And so we need repentance in America, Scott.
Well, it doesn't change the fact you're still killing a kid. You're cutting up a life, inside the woman. I don't care how it got there. I don't care if whatever your story is your story. But you stick to the basic principles. It is still a human being and a child in the womb, and you're going in with a pair of scissors. You're cutting off the arms and legs and the head of this child, and you're sucking out the pieces to avoid 9 months of pregnancy. Okay. That's the story, though. But that's what you're doing. You're going in and you're killing a life, and that's why these women they're all mostly Democrats, and I don't think there's any Republicans. I've never known a Republican woman or a conservative. Certainly
not a real Republican. No,
not a real one. But I don't know, any real Christian that would do this at all. So they're all godless, heathen, Democrat, liberal, fanatical nut jobs, of course. But the fact is, it causes them extreme emotional, spiritual torture after they go through this thing, and
they're
it's
never
money
the same.
making mill. And these poor girls, of course, it's such a self-inflicted drama. It is the testimony of the dysfunction of this country is 50 years of liberal laws that have poisoned and destroyed the culture. It has decimated families and marriages. So you have these young women sleeping around, getting pregnant, getting abortions, going crazy, tattooing themselves, going more crazy, becoming part of Antifa, dyeing their hair, losing their minds, defecating in the streets, and protesting for the communist, trying to advance communism in America with a flag, and protesting Trump as if he is the source of it all. No, Trump is not the source. Christians are not the source. Republicans are not the source. Democrats are the source of all of the evils and the ills in modern society. Now, you may call yourself an old school Blue Dog Democrat because your great grandfather was from Kentucky or something. I don't know. But this is not 18th century Kentucky. This is not 1930 America. This is not 1950 America. This is 2018. Probably one of, if not the, abyss of this country, culturally, intellectually, physically. We are at the lowest we've ever come, I think, in this country because we have tolerated liberalism and Democrat laws, and we've tolerated it in the Republican Party, in the Conservative Party. We've tolerated the effeminization of men. We've tolerated this code of political correctness, how you can't speak above a certain volume, how you can't use certain words, how you can't be salty, if you will, and have a few curse words. Let me tell you something. When I say some good curse words, they are used advisedly. When I curse bad things and bad people, I'm cursing the evil spirit within them. I'm cursing the devil, and I don't back down. I don't apologize. I know some people may have sensitive hearts, and they don't like that language. Well, I'm not here to have a board game or a card game or a kind conversation. I'm here to fight evil. I'm fighting a war. It's an information war.
Well,
it's
you know,
a war of words.
Some religious people might feel that you're just not listening to your inner feminine side, brother. You're just not much of a girly man. You need to get sensitivity training, Scott. What's wrong with you?
I read a book called Carl Stern's The Flight from Woman when I was back in the Bush administration. I was in Heritage and all that. And this is a wonderful book, The Flight from Woman by Carl Stern. And it talked about wonderfully, and there are other books that are really good, like Men in Marriage and Sexual Suicide, both by George Gilder. But Carl Stern's The Flight from Woman talked about kind of what you're talking about, Mike, that men and women do have a masculine, feminine side. That's what God made them. We all know that. And Carl Stern's book, The Flight from Woman, was modern society is casting away the beauty, the virtues, the sensitivity in the woman feminine side in man, as well as women. We're casting out the feminine side. It's almost like we're trying to chop off our right arm because we've defined it as bad, that only the left arm is good. It's sort of like what Allie Stuckey put out on Prager University. I sent you. She's talking about the same thing we've been talking about. Maybe she's watching our show and listening to us. She hasn't responded to an invitation to interview, but I'm sure she will. But as a society, we've been casting out real virtuous feminine sensitivities and delicacies and gentleness. Now, men have that, but when it is not understood and encouraged as how men can exercise it and value it, if it's seen as having no value, as if a women's femininity has no value, what do you have? You have an androgynous society. You have a society that doesn't want to be feminine or masculine or feminine gentle and masculine hard. Instead you have this blindness, this lostness.
It looks like a sexual dialectic because it seems like what's being promoted in men is the feminization, but what's been promoted in women is the masculinization, or women taking charge, women wearing the pants. And it's been going on for decades now. The reality of what we have discovered is that through the wars, let's go back just to World War II. World War II, then right after that Korea, and then right after that there was a brief break, but we had people in Vietnam since the middle of the 50s. So then there was Vietnam, and that lasted from like 63 to 75. That how many men, Scott, were wounded? How many men were maimed? How many men came home broken or addicted? How many men had shell shock because they didn't have PTSD? They didn't have those terms in World War II and Vietnam. How many fathers were lost? how many children were illegitimate because the fathers were lost and the wife needed comforting? How many children were raised up in this period of time since the 40s in America so that the family has been devastated by the military-industrial complex and their war system? Because we've seen this continuing to grow. Now they're sucking the women into the military, into jobs that were never, ever right for a woman. The reality is they're not even right for men for the most part because they're so devastating. But we're looking at the fact that we've lost the ability for a Christian godly definition of what a man and a woman is, what a husband and a wife is, what a father and a mother are. We've seen all these definitions being overthrown, being run over. The barriers have been destroyed between different things where it was common knowledge what a real woman was in the past. That's what you're talking about. It was common knowledge what a real man was, but was that hijacked when they were saying real men smoke Marlboro? Was that hijacked when they only had John Wayne manifesting a real man? You know what I'm saying? Or Audie Murphy when they're either killing Indians or Nazis. What we've seen is that the artistry of what it means to have a godly family, the artistry that was actually captured on the front page of this Saturday Evening Post by Norman Rockwell, of what it meant to have a family that was filled with love and respect and honor, that has been, because it is poetic, that has been it has been run over. It has been we've been desensitized. It's been abused, that image of what is possible when we're really when we have a godly culture. And what does it mean? Well, we've been at war with God. That's what it means. This nation has been at war and in rebellion, and that rebellion has been manifest in every kind of immorality. And right now, I think we're seeing the pinnacle of immorality, if there can be such a thing, except it's a spike pointing downwards. We're seeing fathers selling their children into pedophilia, fathers selling their children to deep state CIA operatives that fracture them and use them as sex slaves. We're seeing that kind of insanity, and it's coming to the surface, and we're seeing actual deep state involvement in Satanism, pedophilia, cannibalism, and things like that. Brother, America is in a valley of decision, and many people are making decisions that continue the downward trajectory into self-destruction and self-hatred and shame and well, yeah, it's horrific.
It's a good word. We talked about this before. The shaming, the shunning. You resurrected or dusted off that old word that is absolutely incredibly powerful and needs to be exercised. Shunning is a key way to discipline rebellion and wrongdoers in a society and ostracize them, expel them from the community, whether it's for an hour or a day. When parents put their kid in a corner to stand, that's shunning them for an hour. Do not come out of your room. That's shunning them. Do not, you're not getting any dinner. You're going to your bedroom because you can't behave. That's shunning them. That is an extremely powerful way to discipline these Antifa kids and the Republicans.
But Scott, the problem that we're looking at is that they've understood that now you can actually enter into a virtual world, so you don't need people around you. You're not subject to real interaction with family. You actually, many of them are on the streets, or many of them are in their virtual reality with different kinds of games and whatever, or they find other unhinged people. So essentially, though, that kind of discipline works where there is a family structure that can support somebody enough to bring them back after they're, disciplined. But right now we're seeing families that are destroyed. They'll never be recovered, Scott.
Yeah. Well, that is the problem. Is you've got this insane fractured society. And as I've said before, some of them, they're just, they're like bodies on the beach, with their guts blown up, like that classic scene from Saving Private Ryan, and they're done. There's no hope. They may live for an hour, but they're going to die. There are these young Antifa kids with purple hair and multiple tattoos and crazy, absolutely lunatics, screaming at the top of their lungs, blowing whistles. Just, they've lost it. I walk past them. They're gone. They're human shrapnel. They're dead. They're dead men walking. They're zombies. They're not in any way, shape, or form going to be given any attention whatsoever. They're mad, rabid dogs that just have to be put down. That's intellectually how you have to view them, because they're gone. And yes, it's a sad thing, but you know what? Sadness is a moment, and then you have to move on. When you see someone on the beach, on the ground, yeah, you're sad, but you move on to achieve your objective, and that is to keep this country together, to save this country, and to stop the insanity that we've seen unfolding for the past 18 years. And what these young Antifa types and these lunatics really represent are someone that, a group of kids that are increasingly violent and only going to get worse. So the question becomes, what do you do about that? Now, we talked about this the other day on Fox News. You had Candace Owens and some other guy that were in Pennsylvania, and they were having breakfast, and they exit the restaurant, and suddenly you got this horde of Antifa leftists chanting and blowing whistles and harassing these people like they've done to other conservatives. Okay, so here's Candace Owen, black girl. She's like one of the officers in Turning Point, I guess. Very good speaker. I like to listen to her. I think she's a wonderful talker, and she's very bright. She's very cute. And she's very happy, and she articulates better than any other black person I've met on the planet, aside from my old boss, who I used to work with regularly on speaking about Republican politics in Washington. But Candace Owens speaks better to black people and articulates why the Democrats and liberals are the enemy of black people and why they're discovering it now. And she's just a force. And she and this other guy being attacked, the guy has water poured on him, right? But he's just standing there like this castrated Barbie doll. He just has this plastic smile, and he's just enduring getting a cup of water thrown at him. Well,
he's a Ken doll, brother. A Ken doll.
Yeah, Ken doll. He doesn't have to react like Rocky Balboa. He doesn't have to do that. But what he does need to do is prosecute the person who assaulted him, so that it sends a message: you will never be allowed to do this to another conservative Republican or any other human being in America without suffering the consequences of your assault. And he stands up there on Hannity and says, well, we're not going to prosecute. We're not going to be like them. We're not going to do that to them. I thought, you SOB, you have done the stupidest thing imaginable. You've harmed everybody. You're harming conservatives because you're emboldening these fanatics to even be worse. Next time, it's not a cup of cold water. It's a cup of hot coffee in your face. It's a cup of hot tea in your face. It's a skillet of boiling oil. It's some sort of more violent, atrocious attack because you haven't drawn the line in the sand and prosecuted someone for that assault.
Well, Scott,
and that's where we're at. Go ahead.
But what you're talking about here is that a lot of people have an image that they are trying to live up to, and his image is ineffectual, but it also reveals that there wasn't anything inside him that understood the battle, that understood the war he's in. He's totally ill-equipped. I think Candace Owen probably understood way more than he did because she has come through a culture and understands a culture that has suffered and continues to suffer. Right. But she wasn't cowed by it. She wasn't defeated by it. He's already been defeated.
Yeah.
Okay. He had no honest, just response. He was just making the point that these people were promoting, and that is that as a white man, he had nothing inside. Yeah. And there are too many people, too many fake Christians, too many fake men, if you will, are running around thinking that their image, their metrosexual image, is because it's politically correct. It has some validity. It has none. Okay, but they don't know that. And who's responsible? Well, is it daycare because their mothers were working? Is it their father because their father is just like that, only they're going to be more so? What we're looking at is that people are realizing that we're at war, and some of them are just running. Some of them stay in denial, in cognitive dissonance. They are just digging their hole deeper in a ditch named the Stockholm Syndrome. They won't face it. But some people are facing it and calling people to stand up like a man and realize that everybody in this culture is in a place of responsibility. If you're not willing to say something, I'm not talking about see something, say something. I'm talking about if you're not willing to be part of the answer to this problem, just to point out there is a right, there is a wrong, there is a place where the lines are drawn, and there is a place where, like, if you think you can force me to allow you to vaccinate my child, I will die before I allow you to do that. There is a place where the lines are drawn, and real Americans are going to understand that a liberty is not the gift of the government. The government was designed to protect our liberty and our rights, but liberty comes from God. You know, the right to walk in the truth and to define what is right and wrong concerning your family based on the word of God. That comes from God. It doesn't come from government. We don't have rights from government. Government has privileges from the people that have the authority over a government in a legitimate government. And that is, if this is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we need to let our public servants know that when they become public serpents and start speaking out of both sides of their mouth with their little forked tongue, that they are disqualified and we're getting rid of them. Scott.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a social violence circle we've seen a long time. But let's shift gears because we've got our guest coming on in about 10 minutes. I want to talk about a couple quick stories that came on. This Julian Assange thing is significant. The other thing is Rand Paul. There's a story that just came out. Delivered a letter to Putin from Donald Trump. And the story says U.S. Senator Rand Paul has said he delivered a letter from U.S. President Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin's administration. Moscow says that it will consider it in the near future. Quote, I was honored to deliver a letter from President Trump to President Vladimir Putin's administration, the senator from Kentucky wrote on Twitter. Dmitry Peskov, Vladimir Putin's press secretary, confirmed that a missive had been received through diplomatic channels and will soon be delivered to the president's administration. According to Paul, the letter emphasized the importance of further engagement between Washington and Moscow in various areas, including countering terrorism, enhancing legislative dialogue, and resuming cultural exchanges. Paul says, I was honored to deliver a letter from President Trump to Vladimir Putin. The letter emphasized blah, 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 same thing we just read. Paul has been an outspoken proponent of engagement with Moscow, who has repeatedly voiced support for President Trump's decision to meet with Putin in Helsinki last July. He recently visited Moscow as part of a Republican delegation. The politician explained that part of the purpose of this trip was to promote greater dialogue between Moscow and Washington. The world is a complicated place. We are in close proximity to Russia and Syria and other places, and I think it would be a very big mistake not to have open lines of communication. He also invited a delegation of Russian lawmakers to Washington, D.C. Aha! Well, that's a great one. Ahead of his visit to Moscow, Paul stressed that his goal in coming to Moscow was to find, quote, common ground with Russian leaders and help prevent further unnecessary escalation of tensions. Well, that's great, but you know who's escalated the tensions? It started with Barack Obama. It started with Barack Obama, John Brennan, the CIA, the FBI, Comey, Strzok, and all of these monkeys that are now being exposed, creating this Russian narrative. I think it started when Paul Preston and I made the presentation and I was put on RT in 2015. I think that had a suspicious beginning of the Russian narrative. And they've expanded upon that ever since. They've called other people who've been on RT, Russian propagandists and all this nonsense. But I think it started way back then. They knew their only chance to get Hillary elected was to create this Russian boogeyman. So Rand Paul's doing the right thing.
I think that Russia knew these things long ago. They know about the deep state because they had to get rid of their own deep state. And they understood what it was like and what Trump was facing because it was under Clinton that he was working with the oligarchs to rape Russia when it was forced into bankruptcy. And so I'm thinking that what happened when your video was sent over there, this was an indicator, like the cloud the size of a man's hand, that it was time to move because they were realizing America was waking up.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, I'll tell you, I remember when it was, I think it was in August, September, before the election, I think it was, maybe before that, but it was within 6 months of the election. I remember writing RT and people that I knew there saying, please have a letter written by Vladimir Putin and publish it in the New York Times and the Washington Post that says, dear American people, we do not want war. We want peace. We want to have cultural closeness with the United States. We are the best friends that Americans have. We are naturally tied in our Christian heritage. And Russia is not the enemy. We're not the Soviet Union. We are the Russian Orthodox Christian people. And we want to ensure that Russia and America are allies and do not fall into war. And for that reason, we're asking you to not vote for Hillary Clinton. Wow. I wrote the letter, and I've still got it. And I said, please have Vladimir Putin write something similar to this and publish it as a letter to the editor in the major newspapers that says, Hillary Clinton will lead us to war. Hillary Clinton hates Russia. The deep state, the military-industrial complex wants conflict. They've done it in Ukraine. They're doing it in the NATO strangulation of Russia. They're doing it in Georgia with Saakashvili, who was a CIA guy who was made the president of Georgia. He was subsequently kicked out, sent back to. He was given citizenship in Ukraine. The Nazi thugs that were later, put up as the rulers. Then he was, I think, taken back to Georgia. But all of this was asked to have President Putin write a letter to the American people, pleading with them that the best hope for peace was to vote against Hillary Clinton, to not vote for her. And I think it was voting for Trump, because he wants good relations with Russia. That is the Russian collusion, if you will. That is Facebook platforms being used for, quote, information war. But it's not. All it is expressing the truth. All it is an American, and many other people did it too, asking for the Russians to state the truth to the American people, that they are not the enemies.
Well, for those that had ears to hear, Scott, when Putin exposed Obama as the criminal that he was for allowing 1/3 of our veterans to die on a waiting list coming back from these false flag wars, and when he rebuked them for what they were doing in Libya and Syria, and he rebuked the American government, the war makers, because of their programs of mass murder in Libya and Syria and in Afghanistan, he was asking them in front of the UN, in front of the whole world in America, do you realize what you have done? So people that were listening to what he was saying and understanding that it had nothing to do with Russia being our enemy, it had everything to do with a nation that had recovered, and we were seeing a real statesman just like Bashar al-Assad.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
This juggernaut of deep state treason
want to go? Still want to listen? Don't have one of those fancy phones with too many buttons. Don't know what an app is? Or you don't even care? Well, we got you here at Revolution Radio. Now you can dial in 24/7 to listen to our shows. We have a number for Studio A and Studio B, and best of all, it's free. Don't forget, carrier charges for your cell phone provider may apply, though, so check with your cell provider to make sure. So ready? Here you go. Get a pen. Here's the number. Studio A is 712-432-6958.
Stay with us.
Studio B is 716-748-0112. Thank you very much for listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station in the world.
Hey everyone, it's Barbara Jean Lindsay, the Cosmic Oracle. If you have questions about your past lives or future plans, need answers from the cosmos about your love life or career, or just want to keep your finger on the pulse of the planet, check out my show, The Cosmic Oracle, here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
Thanks for tuning in to Revolution Radio. Here at Revolution Radio, we are listener-sponsored and commercial-free, but there still are bills to pay. In order to raise some needed funds to cover the cost, our station is offering a silver special. In the continental United States for a $60 donation, or in Alaska, Hawaii, or Canada for a $70 donation, we will send you an uncirculated 2018 1-ounce pure silver eagle. The $70 donation, the extra 10 is to cover shipping, by the way, outside of the continental United States. When making the donation, you must put Silver Eagle promo in the notes on the donation. And thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at revolution.radio and freedomslips.com. Without you, there is no us. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Looking for a nightcap to fill your listening needs? Come join us on Spaced Out Radio with me, Dave Scott, right here on Revolution Radio. Monday through Friday for 3 hours a night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, we will take you down the supernatural path. From ET contact to the paranormal and all of the spiritual, cryptid, and conspiracy stories in between. You can find us right here on Revolution Radio at spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter at spacedoutradio, and on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show. Spaced Out Radio. It's a night of talk and interaction. Are you experienced?
Let us play with all our toys and let us think that we're...
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. It's going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax. Let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott Bennett, Michael J. on Shell Games, returning to you on August 8th, 2018. And we want to remind everybody to give, if you can, and support the radio station with your kind donations, and your prayers, of course, are always welcome. The address is freedomslips.com. And if you join for the $5 a month, you get access to all of the recorded shows, and you can share them with your friends and neighbors and such. You can download them. So we encourage people to do that and help us fight the good fight. Mike, right now we've got Mike Steger with us. Mike, I've heard him talk. We've had him on before. He's from the Larouche Institute, and he's given some wonderful analytical papers and briefings and discussions from everything regarding the China Silk Road, the international relationships between Russia, the United States, Iran, China, and elsewhere. And we have a meeting that's coming up on Saturday that I'm going to be attending with you, Mike. And I wanted Michael Steger to be rejoined with us and talk a little bit about that meeting coming up on Saturday, what's going to be discussed. But besides what I'll be addressing, and I wanted to use this as a preparatory too for what we see coming with Assange being invited to the United States, how we can really shift into full battle mode, full assault mode, and help drive this home and expose everything that needs to be exposed, and really win this. Because as we see the left and the deep state coming apart at the seams and losing their minds, we have to be the more vigilant and really ferocious with the truth, and not back down and not stop and not retreat, because this is a very volatile time, and the November elections are coming up, and we have to really win this to secure our country, or else. So, Mike Steger, I'll hand it to you, and give us an update. You there with us, Mike? You may have your microphone on mute. Okay, we can't hear him. Okay, he's on, but he can't hear anything.
Why don't you do that, and I'll put some words in here, Scott.
All right, pal.
You know, this is a new time in America. We've never had the internet like we have it today. It's a two-edged sword. I liken it to a sword in a Bible study, and it's a famous Bible study. It's the story of David and Goliath. David went against a horrendously big enemy. I mean, everybody in the army of Israel were trembling in their sandals, and but he had a spiritual mission. He had a sense of conviction that came from God. He had courage that came from God, and he went against this giant, you know, somewhere between 11 and 12 feet. But let's remember, it was proportional. If he was 11 or 12 feet tall, you know, he was actually, you know, maybe 5 or 6 or 7 feet wide at the shoulders, that kind of thing, because these were real giants. They weren't just tall beanpoles. Okay, so he came after this giant with 5 stones in his little purse and a slingshot. And he went after this guy. He hit him in the forehead. The guy fell to the ground with a single shot. He fell to the ground. Then David ran over and grabbed this sword, this huge sword, probably had 2 edges, and he cut the giant's head off and held it up. Now, when that happened, he had taken the sword of the enemy, okay, and used it against him. And we know that the DARPA and the deep state created the internet. But we have gone after them. We've used our heads. We've gone after them, and we have found out how to pick up this sword that they're using to do information vacuuming on everybody. And for those of us that have, you know, gone through the reality check of realizing everything we say and do, everything we email, everything we text, everything that we're recording is going into a file with our name on it. Well, okay, fine. But the reality is we don't care. Because what we're going to do is make sure we're telling you the truth, and we're confronting you with the reality of what we know is right and wrong. And if you are thinking that we're intimidated because you want to try to pretend to be God and knowing everything so that you can send out your MS-13 or whatever, or your drones, or use our phone for a Hellfire missile to guide it into us, that's your decision. But there are people out here who understand that this is war, and there are millions of us that took an oath and understand now we're identifying the domestic enemy. We see who you are, what you're doing, and we're getting ready. We're already ready in our hearts. We're doing whatever is necessary. This is an information war. Even Hillary Clinton, that demonic beastie who likes to eat children, realized that the deep state was losing the information war. Well, that was just the beginning. We're going to see these people in prison waiting execution. So, Scott, are you back?
Okay. Still trying to get him. Still trying to get him on board.
Okay.
I think the problem may be his phone. We're still trying to get it.
All right. Very good. Well, the issue is for us. What is this information war? Well, we have witnessed this amazing phenomena of literally hundreds of people. I thought it was a few, but look at our social media platform only allows us to get a little picture, a little snippet, a little, picture window inside something that's huge. But what is happening with YouTube, with all these different venues, with Twitter, with the people sharing their emails with contacts they have, with views that they have into their section of the internet, I'm seeing hundreds, maybe thousands of people in America using social media to start telling the truth, to start communicating with their neighbors, to start exposing the different strongholds of profiteering at the expense of human suffering, strongholds like the cut, burn, and poison method of population control that's called American medicine, strongholds of the war against drugs that's been used to send literally millions of people for non-violent violent offenses into the prisons for profit industries. What we're seeing is that Americans are waking up. The sleeping giant is waking up, and we're beginning to focus on and put our little intellectual and spiritual crosshairs on the bastards. And we're realizing who and what we're dealing with now because the truth is marching on. Scott, what do we got?
All right, Mike, are you with us?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Okay, we hear you now.
There you are, Mike. Welcome
all right,
aboard.
all right. Thank you.
Well, you got to realize this is the deep state attacking us, shutting down. Maybe they hate us as much as Alex Jones and Ron Paul and all the smart people. And I'm glad we have you on because you're definitely one of the smart people. So I'm going to be quiet and hand it over to you, Mike. Just give us, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you want to update on us. What we've been talking about so far is, of course, WikiLeaks, Julian Assange being invited over. Personally, I think that's a wonderful thing because Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were instrumental in my Shell Game report that exposed Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer at the Department of Justice, a law firm called Covington and Burling, illegally sending Chinese Uyghur terrorists to Switzerland and confiscating Swiss bank accounts that Brad Birkenfeld, a whistleblower, had brought over, throwing him in jail. And WikiLeaks provided the cables to Birkenfeld that showed Hillary Clinton's conspiracy to do this. And we've sent this up to members of Congress. I included it in my book, Shell Game. And WikiLeaks being invited over, among many other things, can confirm all of this. And it can really be the final nails in Hillary Clinton's coffin. And at the same time, he needs to be given absolute immunity so that they can't Shanghai him. So I'll hand it over to you, Mike.
Yeah, I think that point's important. I have no trust in either Senator Burr, the Republican, or Warner to believe that they actually want to hear what Assange has to say, given their role in the ongoing coup against President Trump. But I certainly think that it's definitely a good idea that Assange be given immunity. Richard Black, the other VIPs, some of the people that Scott, are clearly in favor of this. And Assange has been very clear from the beginning. He's willing to provide information on where he actually got the Democratic Party emails that exposed the corruption. I think it's also worth noting that Rand Paul, who's part of this overall discussion, is currently in Moscow. He met with Vladimir Putin today. He provided a note from President Trump to Putin on areas they can continue to work on: cybersecurity, terrorism, and so on. I think there's a real potential shift in the wake of this election, and I think the egregious steps, and it's so severely egregious, and yet it's so in broad daylight. And I think that to the extent that it may intimidate people, we do broad outreach to the population. So we're always talking to people, and we can see how these things you get a fear reaction from some of the population over the closure of these Twitter accounts or YouTube accounts. Alex Jones, Peter Van Buren, other people. We saw this with members of the Congress just a couple weeks ago, and not as severe, but a similar tendency. The problem is that these are done in such broad daylight. It makes it very clear. You have a CIA, FBI-run attempted coup on the United States. They want a full police state enforcement. They want to control the sources of information, the media and propaganda. They intend to destroy any aspects of industry or manufacturing in the country that are still left. And they want war with Russia and China. That's clearly their orientation. Now, I don't think anyone could provide an argument that that will somehow preserve the United States for the long term. That would be an immediate destruction of the United States, lead to the rapid destruction of Western civilization, and it would lead to civilization shifting towards places like China, India, and Asia, because that's where you actually see cultures that are committed to survival. So I think there's a big wake-up call, and I think the 2016 election was the first sign of real life in the American people. We saw this in Brexit. We see it now in Italy. But this election really gives us a chance because there is a global dynamic that is supportive of the steps the United States is attempting to make to get out of this war dynamic, to get out of this because let's remind ourselves, this police state, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, these are just cutouts. We know the back end of these things are all CIA, intelligence, NSA operations. You go to Silicon Valley and you feel like you're in Washington, D.C. It's the same vibe. It's the same conformity. But they operate globally. They spy on Merkel. They spy on every world leader. They spy on all of our enemies and our friends alike. You've got FBI running police operations in Afghanistan and Africa. I mean, the FBI is running police operations in all parts of the world. So us dealing with this here, and I think nations like China, other nations who are a little bit upset about Trump's trade negotiations, have to take into account that we're dealing with a criminal police state apparatus which is deployed globally. And the source of it is in the United States, and we've got to take care of it here. We've got to uproot it here, and that's what the political fight is. But at the same time, I think more Americans need to realize there is a dynamic that's very supportive of what the American people are doing. The desire to get back to manufacturing, to industry, for growth. I don't know if you guys saw this. There's a bit of a fight on it over the last week or so over a concept that's called the global greening. Because to most people, I think they realize this, every living process on the planet is dependent upon carbon dioxide, either directly or indirectly. Yeah. Either you eat plants or you are a plant, all right? So to have excessive carbon dioxide is a myth. It's almost impossible to have excessive carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
The more you have, the more plant growth takes place. There's carbon dioxide, sunlight, and water. If you have those, you'll get plant life and more of it. And so there's been now NASA studies. A UC Santa Cruz professor came out. Imagine a society that has been convinced that they're putting out too much carbon dioxide into the environment, and that's what's killing them off. That's insanity on a cult-like level. We've got to really abandon this absurdity and get back to real production, real industry, and in a certain sense, real science, because it just shows how much of a fraud. How many university science programs are living based on these lies rather than the questions of perpetual growth potential? And
Mike,
what about the GMO? To do that.
What about the GMO things that are being introduced by the really huge international, multinational agribusiness corporations, Monsanto and Bayer and whatever? This is about a Genesis program that was defined, in the Georgia Guidestones, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. People need to wake up and realize that there is a group of people that are evil. They are incarnated as evil, and they do not want a population in the world anywhere near the size that it is now because they can't control it. Mike.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate point, is that all of these policies have been adopted for one specific thing, for the control of the population and the reduction of the population. And what they're denying, though, is something very specific about human identity, which is, most people today in the mass media and the elite political process have a hard time defining what's living and what's dead. I would actually define it as the culture of the elites are actually a necrophiliac culture.
Right.
Like they've gone bizarre. That's why you see this idea that you're defining carbon dioxide as killing, as what's creating mass death. It's just absurd to the point of insanity. But there's also a question of, there's a difference between living and creative identity or human identity. And that's really the question, because the one thing about human existence is that it never has to end. Yes. It can always evolve consciously through culture and through ideas to find a way of surviving under new circumstances. That's true if the culture changes to get, say the weather changes to get very cold. We can survive a very cold period. We could build a lot of power plants. We can move on to fusion energy, and we can fundamentally change our environment however we need to. That could even take place on the moon, on Mars, and in other star systems. That's possible. That's uncharacteristic of any other living species on the planet. That ability comes from human individuals, the ability to make discoveries about how the universe works and to communicate those discoveries effectively, that you actually inspire your societies to act upon them. And this is something that we've got to really get to, because this environmentalist agenda, it's a eugenicist agenda. It comes from people like Julian Huxley. It's a British imperial program enforced by people like Prince Philip, the World Wildlife Fund, and its basic intent is to define human economics as something of an animal-like study, rather than economics as that study of mankind's potential for unlimited growth. And that is what we have to, I think that's part of the paradigm shift that has to take place.
You know, it's Hayekian, it sounds, on Austrian economics versus Keynes, which is Austrian essential Hayek's premises. The more information, the more you allow people to be completely free and creative, the healthier all of humanity is. When you allow the cream to the crop to rise, everyone else is benefited. And I think you're exactly right. I like how you say the culture of elites is a culture of necrophilia. And there is an insanity, there is a schizophrenia. Mike and I have been talking about this. I think we're the only ones who've been talking about it, except, I'm so glad to hear you, because we're, kindred spirits in these ways. But Mike and I have been talking about this for a long, long, long time. And I've looked at it from a PSYOP, psychological, emotional perspective, a social science data perspective. And I see, identity. When I was doing my doctorate, one of the papers I wrote was the pyramid of identity is sexuality, history, and spirituality. Those three lines interconnect into a triangle, if you will, and they're always growing and evolving, because when you come out of your mother's womb, you're instantly a boy or a girl, your sexuality, and that grows and matures into the utilization of sexuality. History constantly grows. When you're 0 to 20, you've got 0 to 20 history, and you can go back further. Where did you come from? Where did your clan, your tribe, your country come from? And spirituality is your sense of connection with God, whatever you define that to be, the creator of the universe and all things. But those things have been destroyed by the American culture. Sexuality is now transgender, homosexual, lesbian. There is no right or wrong. There is no moral, spiritual connection to spirituality. I'm sorry, there is no moral, spiritual connection to sexuality. So it's just like a handshake. It's just like the Brave New World. You put on a condom, you take a soma, you have the sexual act, and that's it. No, there's a lot more. There's a multidimensional, poetic, spiritual experience to it, but we've stripped that away. We've outlawed it. So sexuality has been corrupted. Spirituality, of course, has been corrupted, and that too has been separated from history, because now there is no history. There's some notion of evolution, but there's no articulation of the geological record to back it or anything like that. And any discussion is outlawed. So history or education, the institution of implanting knowledge and wisdom into people's minds so that they know history and social norms and reading, writing, arithmetic, and law and science and things that man needs to be able to recognize the things you talked about, photosynthesis and life and carbon dioxide and the laws of nature and animal husbandry and fabrication of metal and metallurgy, and all of these things have been destroyed in our education institution. And I say this as a long-winded way to say, when you take and destroy sexuality, history, and spirituality, you destroy the core of identity. And isn't that what we have walking around today in America, amplified by vaccines, of course, but we have a population in America that has no identity. They have no understanding of sexuality. They have no understanding of spirituality. They have no understanding of history, and they are Antifa. They are rabid, violent thugs in the process of self-destruction because they have no concept of these things, no sensitivity to these things. And we've been talking about it. As sad as it is, Mike, we have to move beyond them. We have to recognize them as the lepers beyond healing and just cast them aside, shun them, and focus on the good seed, the healthy components of our society to keep our American society together. And I'll end it by saying this. All of this liberalism and transgenderism and perversions and corruptions and divorce culture and cohabitation and all of these things that contribute to the criminal statistical increase in the society and the individual personality destruction, all of these things, all of these ideas, they didn't come from the Indians. They didn't come from the Asians. They didn't come from the Russians. They didn't come from the Africans. They came from the white liberal culture, and no one's whiter than me. I was born in Scotland and have got Scottish and German in me. But it came from the white liberal culture in America as a suicide policy we've allowed to come up. And I'm fascinated about the British connection. I look forward to hearing you articulate that.
Let me respond to that.
I want to put that. Hold on. I want to put it up to Mike first to respond. I want to hear his.
I want to respond to both of you.
Well, I want to hear Mike first. Go ahead, Mr. Sager.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I think, this is something that, Mr. Larouche has discussed for a long time is, this question of human identity, because at core, the entire characteristic of identity is shaped by the thousands of years of recorded and also thousands of years of non-recorded of the history of the development of mankind. At core in that, I think in essence, and I think you'll find this especially in the strain of the unique quality of Western civilization. Every great civilization contributes something to the overall development of mankind. Within that, the Western civilization can be captured, I think, by an ancient myth of a society that identified the true basis of mankind long-term survival, and that was the Promethean myth. You find it's almost exemplary of what you saw with the Christian movement and with Jesus Christ. But you saw it with Socrates, you saw it with Joan of Arc, you saw it with any major great advancement, the sacrifices made in World War II or by Martin Luther King, by other figures who are willing to put their life on the line. And that Promethean myth is very specific because Prometheus sees that there's a crisis. He's a titan. He's part of an elite, what they call the gods, but basically an elite of a transoceanic civilization, probably in the areas of Morocco today, like northwest Africa, that would have access to the Atlantic islands like Cape Verde, but possibly even into the Caribbean. But regardless, an ancient culture, but seafaring, had the ability to use stars for navigation or astronavigation. And Prometheus realizes there's basically a coup. Zeus creates a coup against his father. And in taking over power, Zeus says that the first action he's going to do is he's going to destroy the population, the broader population. He's going to basically cull the herd. And in Prometheus' sense, this is a direct violation of what's sacred within the universe itself. So he basically challenges Zeus by bringing to the masses the principle of fire. But not only fire as almost both literally because of the critical nature of fire as defining mankind's difference from animals. Because no animal has ever come to use fire in a conscious way the way mankind has. You find this, ancient cultures hundreds of thousands of years ago started to distinguish themselves in this way. But then also through poetry, through ideas, through number, or what becomes measurement in science. That these questions are what Prometheus brings to mankind, and in doing so, he's prevented mankind from facing the wrath of Zeus, or this idea that somehow that there's population has no way of fighting against these ideas of massive population reduction or population control. They now have the basis of a higher sense of identity, not simply to take the scraps that are given to them, but to act in the universe, which is equal within is equal in potential within all human beings. That ability for any individual to decide to act upon the universe and not within what's a predefined kind of cage of some social system. And in doing so, Zeus then takes revenge on Prometheus. He chains him to a rock, has his liver eaten out every day, and then grows back every night. And this is supposed to happen in perpetuity. But Prometheus provides a sense to mankind of this higher value. Every great individual in history has done the same thing. And that's what I think the basis today, all of the liberal crap, whether it be the extreme positivism or reductionism in science, the idea that somehow all life, all things can be boiled down to some basic chemical part or subatomic particles, that you can basically cut life. Life is some kind of epiphenomenon that just arises, that it's not a guiding, directing principle. Yeah, accident of a statistical accident, right. These kinds of, from the science to the philosophical absurdities that you get today in postmodernism, to the destruction of religion into simply ritualistic practices, that you're losing that you're basically stripping human life from the very principles which have shaped mankind's development over these thousands of years. And the thing that I think is unique about what Mr. Larouche had done in his career is that he recognized that process of development of identity through history, through culture, through science, through religion, is ultimately, if you study it as a scientific phenomena, you're looking at what should be defined as physical economics. Because the idea of economics is to create the ability for long-term human survival. The only way you're going to do that is if you have an increasing number of individuals making new and profound discoveries of how our universe works. That's the only way mankind can continue to survive for a long time. Mike. That you can't, yeah, sure, but that you can't simply define it based on some mathematical explanations or some set of rules. You have to be able to provide a population with the ability to make profound discoveries. If you have that commitment, that love of mankind, that the Promethean myth captures, then you actually create the conditions for long-term development of a nation. And if that's the identity, because identity is something that's always going to be growing and developing. But as you said, if you cut people off of history, you give them some set of rules, you're almost guaranteeing that you have the ability to control them. And that's, I think, the liberal culture today is that you've got people boxed in to where they're not sure what sexual identity is any longer. They believe that carbon dioxide is destroying the planet, and that essentially peace is war and war is peace. I mean, you see a population highly disoriented and confused because they've rejected the very essence of what human identity is.
Thank you, Mike. It was notable to me that both of you referred to Huxley and the perversion that has come out of a post-Christian England, in that we're dealing with people being defined and actually denominated like we have alphas and betas and gamma or deltas and gammas, that people have actually been subjected to a chemical kind of a triage, in that people are right now subjected to massive injuries in the vaccine programs, in the GMO foods. And this was the kind of thing that was seen by these demonic utopians like Huxley and his brother and other people that saw that mankind had to be managed in a way that was going to destroy the structure of society. That is, break down social cohesion, destroy the families, destroy the prominence of religious thought, destroy national sovereignties and kingdoms. And what we're watching right now is that because we're able to reach back and look at not only the myths, but the significance of true Christianity, the significance of why the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, were foundational in every single American colony and every single American state, giving us not somebody's opinion that we voted on, but giving us a standard that actually was even defined in our timeline, where we had Anno Domini, or BC, that is before Christ. We're seeing that the Decalogue and a declaration of the kingdom of God, that is, that he rules and he has rules, that this thing was primary in what was resisting the Roman, if you will, the Vatican interjection of agencies of change, agencies of antichrist thought, agencies of promoting the dialectic, the order of chaos that have been introduced in pitting men against women, and Democrats against Republicans, and whites against blacks and other races, or all people of color against whites, and the different kinds of political things. That what we're looking at is that a beacon, okay, a flashlight, a huge flashlight in the night is shining and pointing up upwards and saying, you know, in the middle of this night, there is still light. In the middle of this night, there is still a place where people are realizing that there are standards that cannot be voted out of existence. Standards against murder, standards against genocide, standards against treason, standards against lying to the people and manipulating them. All of those, by the way, were found in the Ten Commandments. And it was no small significance that under Obama and the Clintons that we saw the destruction of the moral foundations of our culture. I am seeing that there is a resurgence because of many miracles, not the least of which is the miracle of watching Russia be restored from their 80 plus years of a devastation under communist Zionist Bolsheviks. Russia threw out the Bolsheviks. Russia got out of debt to the Bolshevik controlled banking system. Russia is resurging as a Christian nation and encouraging the West to reaffirm their commitment to Christian moral law. And essentially, that's not about, denominationalism. That's not about fractionalization. That is about that there are basic things that are more important than individual memberships or individual opinions. That this is now, we're in a place where we have to make some decisions that will enable us to survive. And it's not about, escaping into space, brother. It's about whether or not we can hold back the tide against people for whom white is black and black is right and good is evil and evil is good. We're seeing the battle between good and evil, and it's going to be decided, short of warfare, it's going to be decided because people find ways to actually confront this mindset of nihilism and stupidity, and actually raise up a standard that's offering healing even to those people that are walking around like zombies. And I know what that's like personally. And the reality is God can restore people's souls. But the issue is we need a safe place to heal. Mike, Scott.
Well, I wanted to say one thing. Hannity is constantly berating the Russians and saying Russian lies and blah, blah, blah. It is not Russian lies. It was British lies. The United Kingdom, Christopher Steele, MI6, MI5, they did not, the Russians did not provide this nonsense about female prostitutes urinating on a bed. The British did that. So we've got deep state actors, Hannity and these other people at Fox. Either they're idiots, or they are so entrenched in their animosity against Russia because of their Catholic bigotry or whatever bigotry they carry. And I know this. I've seen them up close. This is a very subtle part of the deception is, quote, blaming Russia for all of this stuff and Russian lies. It's not Russian lies. It's British lies. And that's where the LaRouche Institute has a particular penetrative grasp that few do, and the history of this this warped and corrupt and wicked political identity and agenda is a mystery to many Americans. And I was born in Scotland, so I wasn't English, but I've got family and roots to Great Britain. And I think it's very important to understand what exactly is going on with this, quote, British apparatus, this British coup d'etat, this situation that is now becoming increasingly revealed with regards to Mueller and Bruce Orr and Nellie Orr and Peter Strzok and Andrew McCabe and these actors who have tried to commit this treason against the president and tried to impeach him. There's a massive revelation that needs to happen. So I'll hand it back to you, Mike, and let you jump in.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it's a very important point, and we've seen the American population start to remember or recollect its real true identity. Prior to World War I and prior to the assassination of William McKinley, where you started to see a real British takeover. Let me just give that as a specific case so people have an idea. Teddy Roosevelt's uncle was the head of the Confederate spy agency, and he was deployed in London because of direct collaboration, or you could say direct collusion, between the British Empire and the Confederacy, not simply over cheap slave labor, which was certainly a part of British imperial economics. That's the British East India Company. That's John Locke. That's Adam Smith. They practically worked, if not directly, indirectly, for the British East India Company. But the British cheap labor, it was also to dismember the United States. Or as we say about Russia, to balkanize Russia. They intended to balkanize the United States into various pieces because they knew the greatest threat to the British Empire was a unified and coherent United States with the unleashed power of what Lincoln was doing with the Industrial Revolution. And so Teddy Roosevelt, with the assassination of William McKinley by so-called anarchists, basically British intelligence agents, ran the operation against McKinley. The British intelligence agents ran the operation against Lincoln. They ran it against John Kennedy. And you bring to power someone like Teddy Roosevelt, which many people, regard as a great Republican president, but ultimately you see the turn of the American policies away from the American system of development and towards this idea of a British special relationship. You started to co-opt the American elites into identifying with British imperial legacy. And that's exactly what you saw. We had a brief reprieve under Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt, like Lincoln was quoted in the Civil War because the British were directly supporting the Confederacy. And so a number of people around Lincoln kept saying, we have to go after the British if we're going to shut this down. It's partly unique. Russia intervened specifically on behalf of the Union to say if the British got directly involved, meaning deployed their ships and troops in a military way and not just through supplies and economic support, that Russia would also intervene. They sent ships to both New York and San Francisco Harbor to make it clear that they were on the side of the Union if the Brits were on the side of the Confederacy. But Lincoln was quoted once as saying, we have to fight one war at a time, first the Confederacy and then the British. FDR was explicit to Winston Churchill. We are not defeating fascism to revive your 19th century colonial ways. And obviously that had specific regard to India. Churchill starved somewhere between 15 and 30 million Indians of food simply because they were taking food out of India for British soldiers in Australia and other places. But that's the same fascism that Hitler was using in Germany. It's the same system. And if you look back at Hitler, Hitler was not a German creation. The backing of Hitler, the support from Hitler, comes from groups in Britain, things specifically like the Cliveden set and other specific interests, people like Julian Huxley and the Huxley brothers. So when you get back at it, you see that this entire operation to destroy the United States, to destroy its cultural orientation, to destroy its commitment to industry, science, and progress, came from a British deployment. Now, here's what gets really fascinating. When you look at this process, you understand it in a sober way. You don't get caught up in the kind of the romanticized versions that the media continues to put out there. The British looked at Rome, and they looked at ancient Greece, and they looked at how these things functioned. You had a study by British in the 18th century by Gibbons on the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, something like 18 volumes. There was a specific study is how do we bring to bear the level of power and control that we saw with the Roman Empire. So the British specifically intended to revive it. And that's why they set up this kind of imperial system. Remember, an empire is different than a king or queen. And a king or queen has sovereignty in that they represent the overall interest and well-being of the people as a whole. It's obviously an autocratic system, but it's connected to the population. An emperor doesn't have that. Emperor has the right to maintain the empire at any costs, meaning they have the right to kill and cull when necessary. That was the model of Rome. And what they looked at then Greece, because how was Greece destroyed? When Greece was not destroyed militarily, the Persians tried multiple times. And in each time, they were defeated by a smaller force, just like the United States consistently was able to beat the British. The Revolutionary War, then the attempted again in 1812, then the attempted breakup in the Civil War. We kept winning. So the British had to look at and study how was Greece brought down. And they recognized it was by destroying an understanding of what it meant to come to know the characteristic of what's true in the universe, to have some cultural and scientific understanding of what's true. So the Persians at that time,
it was a demoralization, wasn't it? It was demoralization.
It was a demoralization.
That's right.
Exactly. And they called it sophistry. They called it sophistry.
That's
and you look at Plato's dialogues, right? And if you look at Plato's dialogues, most of them deal with the idea of sophists who come in to pervert the idea that anything can be known as true, and all you have is belief and opinion. You no longer have a sense of truth, and you no longer have a cultural agreement that we can come. It's about, as Thrasymachus makes the argument in the Republic, that it's that who has the power controls the beliefs and opinions, and you no longer have what's true. Right. It leads to extreme nihilism. Right. Go ahead.
No, I was just wanted to draw the parallel, what you'd say, comparing nihilists to the sophism and sophists.
Well, once you no longer have truth, you end up with all of the perverse philosophies of postmodernism that you see in the 19th century. Because the same thing was done to Germany. Germany in the early 19th century was becoming the pinnacle of human culture, and perhaps to this day is still the hallmark of the pinnacle of human culture. Beethoven, Riemann, Weber, Gauss, Mendelssohn. I mean, the breakthroughs of industry, of scientific discovery, of classical culture. It's where Einstein and these other advanced discoveries come from.
Yeah. Also, the Reformation came out of Germany, which provided a foundation. And didn't the printing press come out of Germany, Mike?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It did. Yeah. And so what happened was you saw a major British operation to destroy Germany with this kind of severe existentialism, materialism, nihilism of Nietzsche, and a demoralization.
Typical of this kind of mindset is you have your truth and I have mine. Right?
Exactly. That's sophistry. It's legalism. In China, they specifically deal with it as, in China, it's known as legalism because you have the same philosophical fight in China. You have the Confucianists who believe the universe is harmonic, the universe is beautiful, and it's knowable, and that you act in coherence with that truth, versus the legalists, or what you get with the Taoists and so on, which are these kinds of sophistry or highly romantic perversions of what it really means to be human. So the British realized that if they were going to destroy the United States, they couldn't do it militarily, but they could do it through cultural perversion. So FDR gave us a reprieve. FDR came in and said, we're going to fight this stuff with industry, with science. We're going to develop the country, and we're going to destroy this fascism that's getting promoted. And we did it. Two world wars, 2 wars across 2 great oceans, and we won. But as soon as FDR died, they immediately moved. And you can read, there's a great book by Elliot Roosevelt, As He Saw It. And in the foreword and in the afterword, this was published in 1945. So literally right after World War II. And he's already saying we are already losing our culture. It's becoming Madison Avenue marketing. We're losing a sense of development of the country and what the true America is.
Mike,
and this
was
is
FDR,
the British takeover.
Was FDR assassinated and replaced? Was it he that actually went over to Yalta, or was it a replacement? What do you think?
No, I think he was there. I think but in essence, the British specifically prolonged the Western invasion so that they could make sure
we could have won, and that's what Patton knew, that we could have won.
Right.
Once we had a whole of Italy. We could have gone under what he called the soft underbelly of Germany, and they wanted to actually decimate all of the warriors, and that's why they chose to go over on Normandy and that front there. And but what do you guys? What have you published about the intentional slaughter of 1 million German soldiers who had surrendered because they didn't want any soldiers in Germany after? Do you know about that?
Yeah, I don't know much about that specific case, but I think what you're saying is
they allowed them to die of starvation after they had surrendered.
Well, there was all kinds of problems. There was also problems in the converse, in that even during the trials in Nuremberg, there were people like Allen Dulles, John Foster Dulles. They opened up the rat line. They were bringing the top and Nazi intelligence operations. They were bringing them into the Americas. They were running a global network. This references Operation Gladio in Italy. This was part of an intelligence deployment across the process. Well, paperclip was the scientific and rocket community, but yeah, it was similar characteristic. And the point was that they prolonged the war because they wanted to marshal in as much death and destruction, because ultimately World War I and World War II was a single war. It was meant to destroy the effects of industrialization on the optimism, on the growth of the population, of the Industrial Revolution, and of modern science.
Wow.
And to a large extent, they did that. Look at what they did to break Germany, which was the very center of scientific and industry within Europe.
Yeah, the firebombing in Dresden and things like that.
And they did the same, and they've done the same thing to the United States. They did the same thing. Look at the cultural
too. Yeah.
Right. The Japan's the same thing. It's a different characteristic. And then you see the cultural takeover of the 1960s in the United States. The same very essence: anti-industry, anti-science.
It came out of a group called the Tavistock
pro-drug.
Institute. Can you comment on the Tavistock Institute, Mike?
Sure. Yeah. Let's take it. You might have more. I'll just say this on the Tavistock Institute specifically. They were the institute that said that there's a danger in what Kennedy has launched with the space program and the Apollo program, because it is creating a strong belief and optimism in the powers of science and exploration to solve the problems of mankind. And that basis, the Tavistock Institute, that's a strategic danger to the survival of essentially the British Empire. That very Apollo project, which was then basically shut down with the assassination of John Kennedy.
Well, Scott, it is, but I wanted to comment here that the issue that we also see is that many times there's programs beneath the programs, and what was happening was that there was a parallel being created that was identified by Eisenhower, and that is the military-industrial complex were multinational corporations, and many of the people that were brought over here from Germany, Mike, were put in positions controlling those corporations so they could continue to build this huge war machine and base it in America.
Yeah.
And so we've got the British control of finances through the central banks and the Rothschilds, the Vatican control of religion through their synchronistic absorption of other things. The Vatican is almost like the Borg, absorbing everybody. But the reality is they have their own kind of weird gospel that was also adopted under the English Catholic Church. So these three pillars of the New World Order, with America being the bully boy to bring all the other nations to heel for this New World Order, is being resisted right now. Mike, do you see that we're confronting these people at a fundamental level, and the information we're revealing about them is something they can't recover from?
Yeah, I think that there's two factors. One is that the nature of this system's policies are in themselves destructive. and that they're short term. And there's a famous French quote from a French aristocrat, "Après moi, le déluge," after me, the flood. Because ultimately, all you can bring in is total chaos and destruction, like you saw with the destruction of Rome, that there was just a massive dark age, literally, of just a complete lack of any coherence in civilization, except in the farthest reaches. Places like England and Ireland is where you actually had civilization kind of kept alive. So I think that we're facing now that, and I think if you look back at the last 20 years, going back to the repeal of Glass-Steagall, and then really very clearly the attacks on 9/11, what you see is a desperate British imperial program, whether it be the Bushes, who are tied closely to this British system, and what you referenced, the military-industrial complex, which at the highest levels was complicit in the acts of 9/11, that you saw that they knew that they had to go for total dictatorial control in the U.S., but also on a global scale. You see the bailouts are directly a part of that. Remember, the bailouts were done under threat of martial law under the 9/11 police state apparatus.
Yes.
So these last 20 years, we have seen them go for, in broad daylight, basically, a full global dictatorship-like policy. And because of the resistance of people you guys are associated with, because of what my organization, the Larouche organization, has been involved in, and collaborators that we have around the world, we're creating an alternative system. There's literally a new paradigm, a new idea of how relations among nations and the value of the individual have to be situated in a new global context.
And I would only add to that, Mike, is an element in that mixture of concrete that you and the Larouche group are pushing, which I agree with. An element to add to that concrete has to be the integrity of the nuclear family, the essential role of the mother and the father in the full formation and development of the child into a functioning adult, providing the essential human knowledge and experience and the emotional, intellectual, physical integrity to that young child. That is what we've destroyed. That is the bullseye of the destruction that they have hit us with, that needs to be resurrected and protected, is the integrity of that family. Can you talk about that in the last?
Yeah, let's emphasize that, because it's actually essential. The basic family unit that you're referencing is the smallest unit you can take in any economic metric. Though we talk about the power of the individual, you have to actually look at it, because the replication, or let's say the recreation, of a new generation is produced through, and the medium by which history and culture acts for the development of new and creative and healthy adults comes through the functional unit of a family. And it's critical. The nuclear family, the mom and the dad, I mean, no one can really argue with any credibility that the people who are biologically responsible and have made a commitment to each other are not the best to raise that family. And so it's that mother and father relationship, but it is that nuclear family. You can take a family away. The extended family is very useful. You have aunts and uncles, you've got cousins and grandparents around. That's a very useful dynamic for children to grow up in. But you cannot. You can reduce that only to the level of the nuclear family, and that's why it's called the nuclear family, because that's the smallest you can essentially go and still have a functioning environment by which the level of psychology, emotion,